One of the most important aspects to getting a good race result is getting a good start. In Formula One and in many other disciplines, standing starts are long-standing traditions. They look very dramatic and they can be very advantageous to a driver when executed correctly, but they can also absolutely ruin your race, literally from the word go, if done incorrectly. In this video, we're going to be looking at standing starts, how to execute them, and also how to make sure that you and your car are ready when the green flag flies. Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Today, in video number 4 in our Sim Racing 101 series, we're going to be talking about race starts and formation laps. Those of you who run Assetto Corsa and Assetto Corsa exclusively will not have to worry about formation laps, as they are a feature yet to be implemented in this sim. However, in many other sims, such as R-Factor, R-Factor 2, and iRacing, formation laps are critical to your race start experience. Therefore, we're going to be covering them as well here. The race start procedure that we're going to be covering is a standing start. In Formula One and in many other disciplines, standing starts are done out of tradition and out of spectacle because they look really, really spectacular, and they can be very advantageous to drivers if they are executed correctly. In the upper left of the screen, I'd like to draw your attention to the box there. That is covering our tire pressures and temperatures. That's going to be critical for when we begin the formation lap. One of the purposes of the formation lap is to make sure that the car is all warmed up. That includes tire temperatures, brake temperatures, and engine and gearbox temperatures. We won't get that sophisticated here because we can't really monitor too many of those things in AC. However, in other sims you may well have to deal with that as well. In the lower left we have our pedal traces, so our brake, throttle, and clutch. The brake's fully applied right now, that's why you see the solid red bar. You'll see all that come into operation once we get underway. To begin the formation lap, one of the things that we want to do is to do a burnout. The reason why we do a burnout is, you'll notice the state of the track underneath the car right now on the grid. It's pretty clean, there's no dust, there's no debris, but that is not the ideal surface to get optimum traction. So when we do a burnout off the grid, we're going to lay a line of rubber down underneath where our wheels will be once we come back around the circuit to line up on the grid for the start. This gives us just a little bit extra purchase off the line, which could make a difference running down into turn 1 when it comes to out-dragging one of your rivals. The other reason we'll do a burnout is just to begin the tire warming process. We'll get a little bit of temperature in the surface of the tires, which then we can use to continue to build core temperature. So the formation lap is getting underway, the green flag has gone up, we would see the other cars in front of us pulling away. Clutch in, first gear, we'd raise the revs up to our optimum torque level. On this engine we're talking about 10,500 to 11,000 RPM, so we'll raise the revs and then we'll dump the clutch to do a burnout. If your car's running traction control like this one is, you'll also want to make sure that your traction control is turned off. So there's our formation lap started and our burnout complete. We now have some rubber down in our grid spot, which will help us for the start a little bit later on. First couple of corners of the formation lap, your brakes will be cold and your front tires will be cold, so you're going to want to take it easy. Also, when you're running in a pack, you're going to want to monitor the distance between yourself and the guys in front and behind, and if you have anybody alongside you, to them as well. Obviously, you don't want to have any collisions on the formation lap. Oftentimes on a formation lap, you'll see the drivers weaving from left to right, much like I'm doing right now. The reason why they do this is to begin to work the tread surface and sidewalls of their tires in order to raise the tire temperature. When the tires are hot enough to be inside their optimum operating envelope, they're generating maximum grip, which means that your race start will be that much more effective. Also, you tend to see drivers accelerating and braking rather aggressively on a formation lap. Doing things like that, for example. What that does is it helps get the brakes up to temperature so that they are also in their optimum operating window. Oftentimes you'll also see the drivers scrubbing the front tires across the circuit. This is another technique to get heat into the front tires. And again, to get a little bit more flexibility into the sidewall. You don't want to do this too much, however, because you'll just put undue wear on your tires, which will end up hurting you later on in your stint. Coming through the final corner onto the grid, you'll tend to see drivers start to do burnouts. What this does, it does a couple of things. One, it helps them find their clutch bite point, and it also gets more heat into the rears. We're shooting for about 80 degrees of core temperature, so we're off of that right now, so a few burnouts should rectify that. Okay, so our tires are not quite up to where they need to be, but we are now on the grid and we're ready for the race start. Once you're on the grid and waiting for the lights to go out, if you're running traction control, you're going to want to make sure that you've returned it to whatever setting you'd like to run. We're going to run pretty aggressive traction control for our purposes here. And then it's simply a question of waiting for the race start signal to be given. In the case of Formula 1 and many other international series, we have red lights that come across the top of the light bar, usually 5 of them. They hold red once they're all illuminated, and then they go out. When they go out, that is the signal for race start. So when you see the lights starting to come up, clutch in, first gear, and raise the revs up to your maximum torque curve. So 3 lights, 4 lights, 5 lights, holding, holding, holding. Lights are out, and off we go. And that generally is the race start. Now the race start can be a little bit more complicated than that. As I mentioned before, we're running traction control on this car. However, many cars, particularly newer Formula 1 cars, have a lot of horsepower, but they do not have traction control. It doesn't make much of a difference in terms of your pre-start procedure, what you do on the grid. But once the start actually happens and the race gets underway, the way that you're going to handle the wheel spin that's going to occur, because you don't have traction control, is going to be different from how we just did that start with traction control. You'd notice I was able to dump the clutch pretty quickly, get on the power very aggressively, and I let the computer sort out the wheel spin. Now we've turned the traction control off, and it's now up to me with my pedal inputs to control what's going on in the rear axle. So the same procedure as before. We see the lights starting to come up, clutch in, first gear, raise the revs. Except now I can't just dump the clutch and lay on the accelerator. What I need to do is modulate my throttle and clutch release so that I control the wheel spin on the rears as much as possible. And it looks a little bit like this. You'll notice for that start, I had to modulate my throttle input as the clutch came out and as the car started to go forward. If I simply threw the gas down for all it was worth and just dumped the clutch, this is what would have happened. I would have just done another burnout, and that would not have been productive in terms of propelling the car forward at its optimal rate of acceleration. I would have lost all sorts of positions off the grid, and we would have had a bad day. To demonstrate again, clutch in, first gear, raise the revs to where you need them. Wait for the lights. 3 lights, 4 lights, 5 lights, hold, out. So you see, it takes practice in order to know just how much throttle you can give it, to know just how quickly you can release the clutch. Every car is going to be different, and in some regards, every circuit's going to be different, because track surface and rubber that's built up, all of that does come into the equation when we're talking about how much traction we can get off the line. Because we've done a few starts now, we've got quite a bit of rubber laid down on this grid spot, so we've got more grip than before. To do a traction control start one more time, we'll put our traction control where we want it for the race start, and then we see the lights coming up, clutch in, first gear, raise the revs, and rather than being more judicious with our clutch release and throttle application, we can be much more aggressive. And there you have it. So in a nutshell, that is the race start procedure. We talked about the formation lap, making sure that your tires and brakes are up to temperature. In Assetto Corsa, you can't really monitor your brake temperatures, but in other sims, particularly R-Factor, you can very, very precisely. So if you know what the optimum operating window for your brakes is, make sure that you're there by the end of the formation lap. Your tires, we did not do such a good job of making sure our rears were up to temperature, but the F2004 with traction control, the computer can pretty much sort that out for us anyway. If you're not running a car with traction control, or you just prefer not to run traction control in cars that do have it, you have to be more precise with your inputs on the throttle and clutch, particularly at the race start. Otherwise, you will do a whole bunch of wheel spin, and you'll do a burnout at best and spin out at worst, which will absolutely wreck your day. So hopefully this was somewhat illuminating when it comes to the tricky business of race starts, and thank you very much for watching.